I hated him when we played against him.
Patrick Ewing was the Warrior King of New York basketball, the heart of Madison Square Garden, and one of the greatest centers the game has ever seen. For nearly 2 decades, he carried the hopes of an entire city on his back, battling giants night after night. But behind the highlight reels and the accolades, there's a darker story. A story of 6 men who defined his pain. Some ripped championships from his grasp. Some humiliated him on his own court, and one, maybe the most painful of all, was once his protector, a brother in arms who turned into an enemy. This is the untold story of Patrick Ewing and the 6 rivals who haunted him most. At number 1, we start with none other than Michael Jordan. For Patrick Ewing, the nightmare didn't begin in the NBA. It began in college, on one of the brightest stages in basketball, the 1982 NCAA championship game. Ewing was already a household name. At Georgetown, under legendary coach John Thompson, he was the ultimate defensive anchor, the shot-blocking machine who intimidated entire teams just by stepping on the floor. Georgetown basketball was feared, and Ewing was the face of that fear. But on the other side of the court that night stood a skinny freshman from North Carolina. Few outside Tar Heel country even knew his name. Michael Jordan wasn't yet Air Jordan. He wasn't yet the global icon. He was just another freshman looking to prove himself. Yet with 17 seconds left, the ball swung into his hands. He rose up, released a jumper from the left wing, and buried the shot that would change the course of basketball history. North Carolina claimed the championship. Georgetown's dream was shattered. And Ewing, the player everyone expected to dominate, had just been introduced to the first cruel twist of fate that Michael Jordan would deliver. That single shot didn't just launch Jordan's legend. It planted the seed of a rivalry that would haunt Ewing for the next 2 decades. When both men entered the NBA, their paths crossed again and again, and the script barely changed. Ewing became the centerpiece of the New York Knicks, a franchise desperate to restore its glory days. Built around his size, toughness, and leadership, the Knicks embodied the spirit of New York. Physical, gritty, uncompromising. And in the 1990s, they were one of the few teams that truly believed they could stand toe-to-toe with the mighty Chicago Bulls. But belief doesn't win championships. Michael Jordan did. Time after time, the Knicks fought their way into the playoffs, only to find Jordan waiting for them. And time after time, he ripped their hearts out. Between 1989 and 1996, Jordan's Bulls eliminated Ewing's Knicks from the playoffs 5 separate times. Every series was a war elbows thrown, bodies on the floor, games that felt more like heavyweight title fights than basketball. Yet when the dust settled, it was always Jordan walking off the court with a smirk, and Ewing left staring at another missed opportunity. Jordan once boastfully said that Patrick could never dunk on him.
He was like, you could never dunk on me.
And yet, here's the paradox. Jordan and Ewing weren't enemies in the personal sense. Off the court, they were close. They joked, they golfed, they shared a mutual respect. Jordan himself admitted that Ewing pushed him to be better. But that made it even more painful. Losing is one thing. Losing year after year to someone who calls you a friend, that cuts deeper than any box score can show. And that's why Jordan stands at the top of this list. He wasn't just another rival. He was the living wall blocking Ewing from the one thing that defined legacies in the 90 seconds, an NBA championship. Without Jordan, maybe Patrick Ewing finally lifts that trophy. Maybe the Knicks hang a banner in Madison Square Garden. Maybe Ewing is remembered alongside Hakeem, Shaq, and Duncan as one of the great big men who won it all. Instead, Jordan kept him locked in a cycle of heartbreak. And when Jordan finally stepped away in 1993, giving Ewing and the Knicks a golden chance, they reached the NBA Finals. One step from history, one win away from immortality. But on the other side stood another rival one who, like Jordan, refused to let Ewing have his storybook ending. Coming in second is Hakeem Olajuwon.
Toughest matchup for you during your NBA career?
Hakeem Olajuwon.
If Michael Jordan was the wall that stopped Patrick Ewing from reaching the NBA Finals, then Hakeem Olajuwon was the one who slammed the door shut once he finally got there. The year was 1994, and with Jordan suddenly retired, the entire basketball world shifted its gaze. For the first time in a decade, the Eastern Conference wasn't under Chicago's thumb. The stage was wide open, and in New York City, a place starving for a basketball savior, the dream felt closer than ever. The Knicks had clawed, bruised, and battled their way to the NBA Finals. Madison Square Garden pulsed with electricity. Broadway stars, Wall Street bankers, and blue-collar diehards all filled the seats, united by one thought: this is the year. After 2 decades of heartbreak, the drought was finally about to end. But standing across from Ewing was not just another opponent. He was facing a man many consider the most complete center of his era. Hakeem Olajuwon. Olajuwon wasn't merely a big man. He was a master craftsman. At 7 feet tall, he moved like a guard, with footwork so graceful and deceptive that it birthed the legendary move known as the Dream Shake. Defenders would lunge left as he spun right, bite on fakes that seemed almost choreographed, and collapse helplessly as he scored again and again. And while most superstars were specialists on one end, Hakeem was a two-way monster, a defensive player of the year, a relentless shot blocker, and the heartbeat of the Houston Rockets. When the finals began, it was a clash of titans, Ewing versus Olajuwon. The Knicks' grit and bruising style against Houston's fluid attack led by their Nigerian-born superstar. The series stretched to 7 games, a grueling war where every possession felt like it carried the weight of history. But in those 7 games, the difference between the two stars became painfully clear. Ewing fought valiantly, but his offensive struggles were glaring. He shot just 36% from the field, a brutal number for a franchise cornerstone expected to deliver. By contrast, Olajuwon elevated his game, averaging 27 points, 9 rebounds, and nearly 4 blocks per night. He wasn't just outplaying Ewing, he was controlling the series. And then came the play that sealed the series in basketball history. Game 6. The Knicks were leading the series 3-2, one shot away from immortality. Madison Square Garden was already bracing for celebration. John Starks, New York's fiery shooting guard, rose for a three-pointer that could have clinched the title. The ball left his hands. The crowd rose to its feet, and then, in a flash, Olajuwon stretched his arm into the heavens and swatted it away. A single block that preserved Houston's season, flipped the momentum, and forced a Game 7. The Knicks never recovered. Houston won the championship, and Patrick Ewing walked away empty-handed from what would prove to be the closest he ever got to the mountaintop. For Ewing, that defeat wasn't just another playoff loss. It was the loss, the defining failure of his career. Fans still talk about that summer as the one that slipped through New York's fingers. And for Ewing personally, it was a moment when destiny seemed to laugh in his face. What made it worse was what came afterward. Years later, Olajuwon, soft-spoken but brutally honest, remarked in an interview that he had aged better than Ewing as a player. It was a subtle jab, but a powerful one. It reminded everyone that while both men were Hall of Fame bigs, one had the jewelry to prove it and the other did not. For Knicks fans, it was salt in a wound that never healed. And when history remembers the great centers of that era, it's Hakeem who stands tall as a champion, while Ewing's story is forever tied to what might have been. But Ewing's torment didn't just come from the giants of the paint. His next rival was different, not a big man, not a dominant post presence, but a cold-blooded sharpshooter who seemed to take joy in humiliating New York on the grandest stages. At number 3, we have Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller was something else entirely. He wasn't the most decorated opponent Ewing ever faced. He didn't tower over him like a dominant center. He didn't even have the championship pedigree that Jordan and Olajuwon carried. But what Reggie Miller possessed was far more dangerous in the moment. The uncanny ability to humiliate. The Knicks-Pacers rivalry of the 1990s was pure theater, and at its core was the personal battle between Reggie Miller and the city of New York, and by extension, Patrick Ewing. Because Madison Square Garden was supposed to be Ewing's fortress, the place where his name would echo alongside legends like Clyde Frazier and Willis Reed. Instead, time and time again, it became Miller's stage. No moment captured this better than May 7, 1995. Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. The Knicks were in control, seconds away from victory. The Garden crowd was already celebrating, fans hugging strangers, preparing to walk out into Manhattan with another win in their pocket. And then in a span of 9 seconds, Reggie Miller tore their hearts out. First, he buried a three-pointer with his quick-release jumper. Then, as the Knicks tried to inbound, Miller darted in front of Greg Anthony, stole the ball, and stepped back behind the arc. Swish. Another 3. Just like that, the game was tied. The Garden fell silent, disbelief spreading like wildfire. And before anyone could catch their breath, Miller calmly sank 2 free throws to complete one of the most shocking sequences in NBA playoff history. 8 points in 9 seconds. The Pacers won. The Knicks were stunned. And Patrick Ewing, the face of the franchise, had to stand helplessly as Madison Square Garden was silenced by a man who thrived on being the villain. But Miller wasn't finished. He made sure New York understood this wasn't just basketball, it was psychological warfare. He turned towards Spike Lee, the Knicks' most famous fan sitting courtside, and delivered the infamous choke sign. Hands wrapped around his throat, eyes locked on the crowd, Reggie mocked an entire city to its face. That single gesture became as iconic as any shot he ever made. For Ewing, it cut deep. Because while Miller was technically tormenting the Knicks as a whole, the responsibility always fell on the captain's shoulders. Madison Square Garden was supposed to be his house. He was the one who carried New York through the wars, the one who bore the expectations of millions of fans desperate for a championship. Yet in that moment, it was Reggie Miller, not Patrick Ewing, who ruled the Garden. And this wasn't a one-time stunt. Throughout the 90 seconds, the Knicks and Pacers engaged in brutal, emotional playoff battles. In 1994, Ewing had knocked Miller out en route to the finals. But even in defeat, Miller made his presence felt, pouring in 39 points in a pivotal Game 5 and nearly stealing the series. In 1998 and 2000, the Pacers returned the favor, eliminating Ewing's Knicks with Miller once again playing hero. The rivalry wasn't defined by who had more talent or who collected more wins. It was defined by the drama, and Reggie Miller was always the one writing the script. The thing about Miller was that he relished being hated. Where most players shrank under the Garden's bright lights, he thrived. He fed off the boos, the jeers, the venom of 20,000 New Yorkers who wanted nothing more than to see him fail. And every time he silenced them, it wasn't just a victory, it was a performance. Years later, Ewing and Miller would laugh about those battles. Ewing even admitted he respected Miller as one of the greatest trash talkers the league had ever seen. But during those wars, there was no laughter. There was venom. Because Reggie Miller didn't just beat you, he embarrassed you. He made you feel it. And for Patrick Ewing, there was nothing worse than watching his home floor, the Garden, become a stage for someone else's act. If Miller was the villain who humiliated him, the next rival on Ewing's list symbolized something even scarier. Not just pain in the present, but the inevitable future. The reminder that no matter how strong you are, there's always a younger, hungrier force coming to take your throne. And that force, standing at number 4, is Shaquille O'Neal. Just when Patrick Ewing thought he had fought every battle the league could throw at him, a new storm arrived, one bigger, stronger, and louder than anything he had ever seen. His name was Shaquille O'Neal, the Diesel. The most dominant physical force the NBA had unleashed in decades. Shaq wasn't just another rival, he was the embodiment of a new generation, a living reminder that time spent. At 7'1" and over 300 pounds, O'Neal didn't just play basketball, he attacked it. Backboards collapsed under his dunks. Defenders bounced off him like they were made of paper. In his rookie season with Orlando in 1992, he averaged 23 points and 14 rebounds, numbers unheard of for a 20-year-old. Within months of stepping on the court, whispers began. Was this the man who would dethrone the old guard of centers, the Ewings, the Robinsons, even the Olajuwons? For Patrick Ewing, this was more than just hype. It was personal. For a decade, Ewing had been the measuring stick for Eastern Conference big men. He was the warrior in the paint, the enforcer who defined toughness for the Knicks. And suddenly, here was Shaq younger, fresher, stronger, walking into his territory and daring to claim the same throne. The ultimate collision came in the 1995 Eastern Conference semifinals. The Knicks, seasoned and battle-tested, went up against a rising Orlando Magic squad led by the 22-year-old O'Neal. It was supposed to be New York's experience against youthful energy, but instead, it felt like the passing of an era. Ewing fought with every ounce of pride he had, muscling in the post, battling for rebounds, throwing everything he could at Shaq. But the numbers told the story. Shaq averaged more than 24 points per game in the series, overpowering New York's defense and wearing down Ewing possession by possession. Orlando eliminated the Knicks, and the message was clear. The future of the NBA belonged to Shaq. For fans, it was stunning. For Ewing, it was brutal. Each dunk Shaq delivered wasn't just 2 points. It was a message, a declaration. Your time is ending, and mine is only beginning. That's why Shaq's place on this list is so unique. He wasn't the villain who mocked Ewing like Reggie Miller. He wasn't the destroyer who crushed his championship hopes like Hakeem. Shaq represented something even scarier, inevitability. The reminder that no matter how great you are, someone younger, stronger, and hungrier will eventually take your place. In later years, Ewing and Shaq built mutual respect. Shaq even credited Ewing as one of the greats.
Never comes up, but I'm putting Patrick Ewing names there.
But in the heat of the mid-90 seconds, that respect didn't soften the sting. For Patrick, losing to Shaq wasn't just about losing a playoff series. It was about watching the center of the NBA universe shift from him to someone else, right before his eyes. And if facing Shaq felt like losing his place in history, the next rival on Ewing's list cut even deeper. Because this time, it wasn't about strength or dominance. It was about betrayal from someone who was supposed to be family. Sliding into the 5th spot is Alonzo Mourning, a rival, whose story with Ewing was drenched in irony. They weren't supposed to hate each other. In fact, they were supposed to be brothers. Both were molded by the same college coach, the legendary John Thompson, at Georgetown University. Both carried the proud tradition of Hoya big men. In theory, this shared bloodline should have bonded them forever. But in reality, it became the spark for one of the NBA's most bitter rivalries. When Zoe entered the league in 1992, comparisons to Ewing were immediate. Was he the next great Georgetown center? Could he outshine the man who came before him? The questions created a natural tension, but what pushed it over the edge was the mid-90 seconds playoff wars between the New York Knicks and the Miami Heat. Those series weren't basketball games, they were battles. Hard fouls, technicals, and fights that would spill into full-blown chaos. And often, at the center of it all stood Patrick Ewing and Alonzo Mourning. The 1997 playoff brawl remains unforgettable. It wasn't just Mourning and Larry Johnson throwing punches. It was the Knicks and Heat showing the world just how deep the hate ran. And when Ewing stepped off the bench, trying to jump into the melee, the league hit him with the suspension. That decision cost the Knicks dearly, and Ewing never forgot it. For Patrick, the sting wasn't just in the losses. It was in seeing a Georgetown brother turn into a sworn enemy. Mourning's fiery personality clashed with Ewing's stoic presence, and the once shared pride of being Hoyas vanished in the smoke of those playoff wars. Years later, both men admitted they respected each other deeply. But respect doesn't erase what happened in those heated years. For Ewing, Zoe was proof that even family ties can turn toxic under the bright lights of playoff pressure. But if that cut deep, the final name on this list was devastating. Because this wasn't about college, or the league, or even playoff competition. This was about brotherhood within the Knicks and how quickly it could shatter. Closing out the list at number 6 is Charles Oakley, the enforcer, the protector. The man who was once closer to Patrick Ewing than any other teammate. For over a decade, Oakley was Ewing's shield. He threw the elbows, delivered the hard fouls, set the bone-crushing screens, and grabbed every rebound in sight. He was the muscle that gave Ewing room to operate. More than a teammate, Oakley was a brother, the heart of those bruising Knicks teams. But here's the twist. It's not the battles on the court that put Oakley on this list. It's what happened after. In the years following their playing days, a divide grew. Oakley, always outspoken, turned into one of the fiercest critics of Knicks owner James Dolan. He waged public wars with the front office, and in one infamous 2017 incident, he was even dragged out of Madison Square Garden in handcuffs after a dispute with Dolan's security. Through all of this, Oakley felt betrayed not just by the Knicks, but by Patrick Ewing himself. Reports swirled that Oakley believed Ewing stayed silent, that Patrick didn't step up to publicly defend him during his clashes with management. For Oakley, that silence hurt more than any on-court loss. And for Ewing, losing Oakley's trust was like losing family. This was the man who had fought side by side with him, who had protected him from Jordan's bulls, Reggie's trash talk, and Zoe's elbows. To have that bond dissolve was devastating. It's a different kind of hate, not the competitive hate of Jordan or Shaq, but the painful hate of disappointment. The kind that comes when someone you love no longer feels like they're on your side. And maybe that's why Oakley deserves the final spot. Because while Ewing battled legends and lost championships, nothing hurt more than losing a brother. So there it is. 6 names, 6 stories, 6 rivalries that define Patrick Ewing's career and legacy. For Patrick Ewing, these weren't just opponents. They were roadblocks, heartbreaks, and symbols of the battles he fought without ever holding the prize he chased most, an NBA championship. But maybe that's why Ewing's story resonates. He wasn't the chosen one. He wasn't the conqueror. He was the warrior, the man who stood in the fire of the 90 seconds NBA and gave everything he had, even when the odds were impossible. And here's the question that lingers. If even one of these names wasn't on this list, if Jordan retired earlier, if Hakeem missed that finals, if Reggie's shot had rimmed out, if Oakley had stayed loyal, would Patrick Ewing's name be etched among the champions? Or was his destiny always to be remembered as the fighter who carried New York's heart but never its trophy? One thing is certain. Those 6 men, whether through rivalry or betrayal, shaped Ewing's story forever.